This is the photo Washington hopes you never focus on. An American construction site sitting still. Half-framed houses exposed to the air. No crews. No movement. Not because of weather. Not because of labor and rest. Because there is no lumber. And the absence of lumber traces back to one of the most calculated economic countermeasures ever deployed against the United States. Yet almost no one in mainstream media is addressing it. Be absolutely clear, what Canada has just done to the American housing sector is intentional. This is not routine trade friction. This is a strategic unraveling of the largest residential supply chain in the Western world. And Washington, the same Washington that ignited this confrontation, does not have a solution. It is Friday, February 27, 2026. And as of this morning, industry leaders say the crisis has crossed into dangerous territory. Major construction companies across the country have issued an unusually coordinated warning. According to them, the housing market is sliding into instability unlike anything seen before. And the source of that instability sits directly north of the border. The lumber shock has arrived, and it is accelerating. Let's spell out exactly what happened. Canada did not declare a ban. It did not announce an embargo. It did not deliver headline-grabbing action that trade attorneys in Washington could challenge at the WTO. And that is exactly why this is so destructive. What Canada implemented is far more effective than a ban. It engineered a structural squeeze, quiet, deliberate, layered tightening softwood lumber flows in ways that are now exploding inside the American economy like a slow-motion blast. To understand the magnitude of this dependency, consider the numbers. Roughly 30 to 35% of all softwood lumber used to build American homes comes from Canada. In a standard wood frame house, the kind most Americans live in, lumber represents around 20 to 25% of total material costs. Now focus on this figure. Industry analysts estimate that every 10% rise in lumber prices is between $8,000 and $15,000 to the price of a newly built home. For families already strained by elevated interest rates, hammered by persistent inflation, and effectively priced out of a housing market that has become inaccessible to an entire generation. That is not a minor inconvenience. That is a systemic shock. That is the erosion of homeownership for millions of Americans, and it is unfolding right now. To grasp why this matters, we need to revisit where the conflict began. The Trump administration intensified tariffs on Canadian softwood lumber. The dispute itself is decades old, but the latest escalation pushed duties to levels Canadian producers described as existential. Washington's reasoning appeared straightforward: tax Canadian imports, encourage American mills to expand, boost domestic output, and claim victory. That is not what unfolded. Instead, Canada assessed the tariff environment, evaluated its strategic leverage, and made a decision Washington did not anticipate. Rather than simply contest the tariffs, Canada began restructuring its lumber industry in a way that rendered those tariffs increasingly irrelevant, sidestepping them while applying maximum economic pressure on the country that initiated the fight. This is not theory. It is documented policy. It is already in motion, and its consequences are no longer avoidable. Here is the critical piece most commentary overlooks. Canada is not restricting lumber because supply disappeared. It is restricting lumber because it chose to, and the approach it used is so layered, so methodical, that many American policymakers failed to recognize it until the impact was unavoidable. Let's examine how this functions. Canada quietly reduced softwood output by closing and consolidating aging sawmills nationwide. Since 2018, national production has declined by roughly 15 to 20%. In British Columbia alone, the largest lumber-producing region in North America, more than 10,000 forestry jobs vanished between 2019 and 2025. This was not a routine market correction. It was a capacity reset. Fewer mills, lower output, tighter supply, higher prices, and Canada retains the premium instead of American buyers. Provincial governments are now channeling available lumber toward domestic housing, infrastructure, and public projects. Shipping south is no longer the default option. When supply tightens, American purchasers move to the back of the queue, not due to a formal prohibition, not because of a tariff spike, because of a deliberate policy choice. Canada decided its citizens come first. At the same time, Canada is exporting far less raw lumber and significantly more engineered wood products: cross-laminated timber, glued laminated beams, advanced structural panels. Higher export value. Lower physical volume available for American homebuilders. Fewer affordable boards at any price. Add to that new carbon tracking mandates and sustainability certifications that have increased compliance costs across the industry. American companies can still buy Canadian lumber, but it is more expensive, more regulated, and less plentiful than before. Environmental standards have become a trade lever, operating outside traditional tariff frameworks and largely beyond Washington's ability to counter. Rail lines and ports are increasingly prioritizing energy shipments, minerals, and other strategic commodities ahead of lumber. Wood shipments face delays, uncertainty, and rising transportation costs. Another subtle constraint layered on top of the others. 5 pressure points. Coordinated. Legal. Difficult to challenge. And the United States has no structural response. But the damage does not stop at lumber yards. The squeeze cascades across the American economy in 3 waves. First, when lumber prices climb, builders do not absorb the hit. They have risk premiums. They price defensively. New home costs rise faster than wages. The affordability crisis deepens, and inflationary pressure intensifies at precisely the moment the Federal Reserve has been attempting to cool it. Second, unpredictable supply triggers construction delays nationwide. A single month's delay can increase total project costs by 5 to 7% due to financing, labor retention, and equipment rentals. Multiply that across hundreds of thousands of active projects. This is not merely a pricing issue. It is a timing crisis. And in construction, time compounds into money at alarming speed. Third, the feedback loop ignites. Developers, distributors, and wholesalers rush to secure inventory early. Hoarding begins. Speculative purchasing accelerates. Artificial shortages stack on top of real shortages. Prices climb not only because supply is genuinely tighter, but because markets anticipate even tighter supply ahead. Fear becomes part of the supply chain. That is how a resource squeeze evolves into a national emergency. That is how a trade strategy failure transforms into a voter crisis. Executives inside the construction sector describe anxiety levels not seen since the supply chain breakdown of 2021, and several privately acknowledge the situation may be worse. In 2021, disruption was temporary and unplanned. This disruption was designed. On Capitol Hill, lawmakers are searching for answers. The ideas circulating: adjusting duties again, expanding domestic production, substituting steel or concrete are precisely the responses that fail to resolve the core issue. Raising tariffs increases American prices without generating new supply. Expanding domestic output requires environmental approvals, permitting timelines, legal challenges, and local opposition that stretch into years, not months. Switching to steel or concrete introduces higher costs, greater energy intensity, and exposure to volatile global markets. Washington can issue statements. It can posture politically, but structurally, the United States remains exposed. Here is what many analyses overlook. Canada is not acting irrationally. It studied American trade pressure and responded with a strategy Washington did not foresee. By shifting from raw lumber exports to higher value processed products, Canada captures more revenue per tree while supporting better paid domestic jobs. Instead of selling discounted raw inputs, it now exports finished materials with genuine pricing power. By embedding carbon accounting and sustainability standards into its industry, Canada positions itself as a rule maker in global markets rather than a passive price taker. In an era where tariffs are blunt tools, regulatory standards are sharper instruments. By diversifying beyond American dependence, Canada reduces vulnerability to Washington's political swings while strengthening ties with European and Asian buyers willing to meet its standards and pay its prices. Canada is delivering 3 clear messages. To its own citizens, natural resources will no longer be discounted to satisfy foreign demand. To the United States, geographic proximity does not guarantee permanent dependency. And to global markets, Canada is a stable supplier but not an unlimited one. What comes next? Watch the next 60 days closely. As lumber inventories at American distribution centers tighten further, the price shock builders already feel the surface in housing starts, building permits, and construction employment data. When those numbers decline, political pressure inside Washington will intensify dramatically. The Trump administration will confront a choice with no attractive path: escalate against Canada and risk pushing American home prices even higher, or step back and accept a visible retreat as voters remain locked out of ownership. This is no longer just a trade disagreement. It is a housing crisis. It is an inflation crisis. It is a political crisis. And all three are intertwined in the same unfolding story: the lumber squeeze playing out in real time. Canada did not create America's construction cost problem. It exposed a dependency that had been building for years. Policy missteps, unresolved disputes, and strategic complacency left the American housing market vulnerable. Canada simply applied pressure at the precise point of maximum weakness, quietly, methodically, and with devastating efficiency. Subscribe to this channel now. Turn on notifications, because within the next 30 days, the first major housing reports reflecting the lumber squeeze will be released. When they arrive, we will break down exactly what those numbers mean for the broader economy, for interest rates, and for your ability to buy a home. We are tracking this in real time. If Canada tightens supply further, if Washington retaliates, if construction firms begin suspending projects at scale, we will deliver immediate, detailed analysis. History may ultimately record that American housing became permanently unaffordable not because of war, not because of a pandemic, but because of a trade conflict Washington initiated without a clear strategy to conclude.